I'm Brennan Cole, 22 years old, and while my parents were taking my sister to Disney World, I was alone in a hospital chair watching poison drip into my veins. Stage 2 Hodgkin's lymphoma, that's what the doctors called it. 6 months of chemotherapy, they said totally treatable. What they didn't mention was how I'd spend my 22nd birthday hooked up to N4 while my family rode Space Mountain without me. My phone buzzed that day with Instagram notifications. Natalie, my 17-year-old sister, posting selfies with Mickey Mouse ears, my parents grinning behind her like they didn't have another daughter back in Riverside, Oregon fighting for her life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I stared at those photos until my vision blurred, not from the chemo, from rage. They'd chosen her dance academy celebration over my survival, and that choice shattered everything I thought I knew about family. I made a decision right there in that infusion room, a decision that would flip our family dynamic completely. What came next exposed truths that had been buried for years, and when the dust settled, I wasn't the only one who saw my parents differently. 3 months earlier, I'd been cruising through my sophomore year at Riverside Community College, pulling double shifts at Grounds & Co. to save for transferring to a 4-year nursing program. I'd wanted to be a pediatric nurse since I was 14, ever since I volunteered at a children's hospital summer camp and watched nurses transform scared kids into brave warriors. My bedroom walls were covered with anatomy posters and acceptance letters from universities I was targeting. Portland State was my dream. Their nursing program ranked in the top 20 nationally. I'd saved $4,200, every penny earned from early morning espresso pulls and late-night study sessions. My manager, Christine, used to joke that I'd memorized the entire Starbucks menu in my sleep. I worked opening shifts 4 days a week, stumbling into the shop at 4:30 in the morning to prep the machines before the commuter rush hit at 6. The exhaustion was worth it though, because every paycheck brought me closer to my goal. I'd calculated that by the end of junior year, I'd have enough for tuition, books, and maybe even a decent apartment near campus. My parents knew about my plans. I'd shown them the brochures, walked them through my application timeline, even asked Dad to read my personal statement about wanting to help sick children the way nurses had helped me when I broke my arm at age 9. He'd barely glanced at it before saying it looked fine, and returning to his spreadsheets from the dealership. Victor and Diane Cole owned Cole Family Auto, a mid-sized car dealership on the edge of Riverside that had been profitable enough to keep us comfortable. 3-bedroom colonial house on Maple Street, 2 cars always in the driveway, annual vacations to Crater Lake. We weren't wealthy, but we were stable, or so I thought. Natalie was the star of our family, always had been. 17 years old, and already accepted to Pacific Northwest Dance Academy, one of those prestigious programs where students go on to perform with actual companies. She'd been dancing since age 4, ballet, jazz, contemporary, you name it. My parents had poured thousands into her training. Private lessons with instructors who danced professionally, custom costumes for competitions, travel expenses for showcases up and down the West Coast. I never resented her talent. Watching Natalie dance was like watching water flow, effortless and beautiful. What ate at me was the disparity. When I'd asked Dad to help with my college application fees, $60 total, he'd hemmed and hawed about budgets being tight. 2 weeks later, he dropped $800 on new point shoes and competition entry fees for Natalie without blinking. Mom would gush about Natalie's performances at dinner, replaying every grand jeté and pirouette in excruciating detail while I pushed pasta around my plate. If I mentioned a good grade or a challenging shift at work, I'd get a distracted nod before the conversation swung back to Natalie's upcoming recital. I'd learned to swallow it, to tell myself that Natalie's achievements were just more visible, more exciting. Dance had clear milestones, trophies, and showcases. My path was quieter, less photogenic. But the pattern was undeniable. Every family photo on the mantle featured Natalie in costume. Every vacation was planned around her competition schedule. My high school graduation got a sheet cake from the grocery store. Natalie's got a catered party, with a professional photographer. I started noticing how Mom's eyes would light up when Natalie entered a room. This genuine joy that never appeared for me. Dad would brag to his dealership buddies about his daughter the dancer, never mentioning he had another daughter studying to save lives. It created this hollow ache in my chest, this feeling of being optional. Late August, I started feeling off. Exhausted beyond the usual work-study grind. Drenched in sweat every night, unexplained bruises appearing on my arms. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning shivering despite the late summer heat, my sheets soaked through. The lymph nodes in my neck swelled into hard lumps I could feel when I turned my head. I figured it was just stress, maybe mono going around campus. I chugged energy drinks and pushed through my shifts, ignoring how my body was screaming for attention. By mid-September, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I was making a cappuccino when my vision went spotty and I had to grip the counter to stay upright. Christine found me in the back room sitting on a milk crate with my head between my knees. She drove me to Riverside General herself, refusing to let me brush it off as dehydration. The emergency room doctor, a tired-looking woman with kind eyes, ordered blood work and a chest x-ray. I sat in that papery gown for 2 hours scrolling through my phone, texting my roommate that I'd be late for our study group. When Dr. Patricia Huang walked into my room, her expression made my stomach drop. She was young for an oncologist, maybe late 30s, with black hair pulled into a neat bun and glasses that kept sliding down her nose. She sat down, which I later learned was never a good sign. Doctors only sit when the news requires time to absorb. She explained that my white blood cell count was abnormal, that the X-ray showed enlarged lymph nodes in my chest, that they needed to do a biopsy immediately. The word cancer didn't register at first. It bounced off my brain like a rubber ball, too absurd to stick. I was 22. I ran 3 miles twice a week. I ate salads and took vitamins. Cancer happened to other people, older people, people with family histories and risk factors. The biopsy confirmed it 3 days later. Hodgkin's lymphoma, stage 2, meaning it had spread to lymph nodes above and below my diaphragm but hadn't hit my organs yet. Dr. Huang's voice was steady as she outlined the treatment plan. 6 months of chemotherapy, a cocktail of drugs called ABVD, administered every 2 weeks. The survival rate was excellent, she assured me, over 90% for my age and stage. I heard maybe half of what she said. My brain stuck on 6 months, on chemotherapy, on the image of myself bald and weak that I'd seen in every cancer movie. She handed me pamphlets about side effects and support groups, her hand briefly squeezing my shoulder. "You're going to beat this," she said, and I wanted to believe her but mostly I just felt numb. I drove home in a daze, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I texted my parents to meet me at the house, that I had important news. They were both there when I arrived. Dad still in his dealership polo, Mom wiping down kitchen counters. Natalie was at dance practice, which somehow felt fitting. I sat them down at the dining table, the same table where we'd eaten thousands of meals, and told them I had cancer. The words felt foreign in my mouth, like I was narrating someone else's tragedy. Mom's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes welling up. Dad went pale, his jaw working like he was chewing words he couldn't spit out. For a moment I thought maybe this would change things, that a cancer diagnosis would finally make them see me. Mom recovered first, dabbing at her eyes with a dish towel. "Oh honey," she said, her voice thick. "This is so scary. What do the doctors say?" I walked them through Dr. Huang's explanation, the treatment timeline, the prognosis. Dad asked practical questions about insurance and costs, his dealership brain calculating expenses. Their concern felt real, but also strangely distant. Like they were hearing about a problem that preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Affected someone adjacent to them rather than their own child. When Natalie got home an hour later, Mom sat her down and explained in hushed tones. Natalie cried, actually sobbed into my shoulder, and I held her thinking maybe this was the moment that would bond us differently. She promised to be there for whatever I needed, and I believed her. Kids are good at meaning promises they don't understand how to keep. The first chemotherapy session was scheduled for late September, a Thursday afternoon. Dr. Huang explained I'd spend about 4 hours in the infusion center every 2 weeks, hooked to and for while the drugs worked through my system. The side effects would vary: nausea, fatigue, hair loss, increased infection risk, but everyone responded differently. Some people worked through treatment, others needed to take leave. She recommended I continue school if I felt up to it, that keeping some normalcy helped mentally. I'd already talked to my professors about potentially missing classes, set up a plan to submit work remotely if I was too sick to attend. Christine at the coffee shop told me to take all the time I needed, that my job would be waiting whenever I was ready. My roommate, a sweet psychology major named Vanessa, offered to meal prep and handle cleaning while I focused on treatment. Everyone in my immediate circle stepped up immediately, except the people who should have mattered most. My parents' support felt performative from the start. Mom came to that first infusion, settling into the chair beside mine with a magazine. The cancer center was depressingly cheerful, pastel walls covered with inspirational quotes and watercolor paintings of sunsets. Nurse Kevin, a muscular guy with sleeve tattoos and a gentle manner, accessed my port and started the pre-medications. Anti-nausea drugs first, then steroids, then the actual chemo cocktail. Mom scrolled through her phone for most of it, occasionally looking up to ask if I needed anything. When I said I was cold, she draped her cardigan over my shoulders and went back to scrolling. 3 hours in, she got a call from the dealership about a parts delivery issue. She took it right there in the infusion room, her voice rising as she coordinated with suppliers. I closed my eyes and tried to disappear into the chair. Dad showed up for the second session 2 weeks later, but spent most of it on his laptop answering work emails. He'd positioned himself at the far end of the room, ostensibly to give me space, but really to maintain distance from the four poles and medicine smell. When Nurse Kevin asked if he had questions about my treatment, Dad waved him off saying the doctors had it handled. That was his approach to my cancer: trust the professionals and stay uninvolved. After that second session, neither parent offered to come again. Mom said the dealership was swamped with end-of-quarter sales. Dad mentioned something vague about appointments conflicting. I started taking Uber to and from treatments, watching the $15 charges add up on my app, while my parents paid for Natalie's private choreography sessions. October brought the hard crash of side effects. The nausea hit first, a rolling queasiness that made even water feel like swallowing rocks. Dr. Huang prescribed anti-nausea meds that helped somewhat, but I still spent hours each week curled around the toilet in my apartment. The fatigue was worse somehow, this bone-deep exhaustion that made lifting my arms to brush my teeth feel Herculean. I'd sleep 12 hours and wake up feeling like I'd run a marathon. My hair started falling out in clumps during week 3, circling the shower drain in dark swirls. I'd expected it, Dr. Huang had warned me, but actually watching my hair abandon ship shattered something inside me. I buzzed what was left with Vanessa's help, both of us crying as the clippers revealed my pale scalp. I bought a couple of soft beanies and tried not to look at mirrors. Through all of this, my parents were politely absent. They'd text asking how I was doing, accepting my one-word responses without follow-up. Mom dropped off a casserole once, leaving it on my doorstep like a contactless delivery. Dad sent a gift card to a meal delivery service, his version of caregiving outsourced and convenient. They never asked about my blood counts or whether I needed rides to appointments. They didn't offer to sit with me during bad days or research clinical trials just in case. It was like my cancer was a minor inconvenience they'd acknowledged and then filed away. Meanwhile, Natalie's acceptance to Pacific Northwest Dance Academy consumed every family conversation. She'd gotten in for their spring intensive program, a huge deal that would run from January through April. Mom and Dad were over the moon, already planning how to celebrate. That's when the Disney trip came up. Early November, about 6 weeks into my treatment, I was at my parents' house for Sunday dinner. These dinners had become obligatory check-ins where I pushed food around my plate while they asked surface-level questions and moved on. Natalie bounced into the dining room. Mid-meal, her phone screen glowing with excitement. "You guys," she squealed, "Tyler just sent me the cutest video from Disneyland. I want to go so bad before the academy starts." Mom and Dad exchanged one of those parent looks, the kind that communicates full conversations silently. Dad cleared his throat. "Actually, we've been thinking about that. Natalie deserves a big celebration for getting into the academy. What if we did a family trip to Disney World over Thanksgiving break?" Natalie screamed, literally screamed, jumping up to hug them both. Mom was already pulling up hotel websites on her phone, talking about packages and park hopper tickets. I sat there feeling invisible, my stomach churning from the chemo drugs still in my system. Finally, I managed to speak up. "What about my treatment schedule?" I said quietly. "I have an infusion session the Tuesday before Thanksgiving." The table went silent. Dad looked at Mom. Mom looked at her phone. Natalie's smile faltered. "Well," Mom said slowly, "you'll be recovering from that session anyway, right? You probably wouldn't feel up to traveling. We'd only be gone 5 days. You can stay with Aunt Rachel or Vanessa can check on you." The words landed like a slap. Stay with Aunt Rachel. They were planning a vacation while I was in chemotherapy and their solution was to pawn me off on relatives. I looked at Natalie, waiting for her to object, to say she wouldn't go without me. She bit her lip, glancing between our parents and me with obvious discomfort, but she didn't say a word. The silence stretched until I couldn't bear it anymore. I pushed back from the table, mumbling something about needing to leave, and grabbed my coat. Mom called after me asking if I was sure, her tone more annoyed than concerned, like I was being difficult by having cancer during their vacation planning. I didn't respond, just walked out into the November cold, and sat in my car for 20 minutes trying to process what had just happened. My phone rang before I'd even pulled out of their driveway. Aunt Rachel's name flashed across the screen. I answered, my voice shaky, and she didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Your mother just called asking if you could stay with me over Thanksgiving because they're taking Natalie to Disney," she said, her tone sharp with disbelief. "Please tell me I heard that wrong." I explained the whole conversation, my words tumbling out in an angry rush. Aunt Rachel went quiet for a long moment, then exhaled hard. "Brennan, honey, I love you and of course you can stay here anytime, but this is absolutely insane. You're in active cancer treatment. What kind of parents leave their sick child to take the healthy one on vacation?" Her validation felt like oxygen. I'd been questioning whether I was being selfish, whether I should just be happy for Natalie and not make it about me. Aunt Rachel shut that down immediately. "This isn't about being supportive or understanding," she said firmly. "This is about your parents showing you exactly where you rank in their priorities. And you need to start believing what they're telling you." Over the next week, the Disney trip planning consumed my parents completely. Group texts flew about flight times and dining reservations. Mom sent links to matching family shirts she wanted to order, Mickey and Minnie designs that made me want to throw my phone across the room. Dad forwarded confirmation emails for their resort, some place called the Grand Floridian that cost $300 a night. I did the math in my head while lying in bed recovering from my 4th chemo session. 5 nights at the hotel, $1,500. Park tickets for 3 people, roughly $1,200. Flights, another $1,800. Food and souvenirs, probably another $2,000. They were dropping over $8,000 on this trip, and they'd balked at helping with my $60 application fees 6 months ago. The injustice of it burned in my chest hotter than the chemo drugs. Natalie tried to bridge the gap in her own ineffective way. She'd text me photos of Disney outfits she was packing, adding little comments like "wish you could come" or "this would be more fun with you there." Her attempts at inclusion felt worse than exclusion somehow. Like she couldn't grasp why a few sad emojis didn't fix the fundamental problem. One afternoon she showed up at my apartment with frozen yogurt, my favorite flavor before chemo ruined my taste buds, and tried to have a heart-to-heart. "I know this is bad timing," she said, perched on the edge of my couch looking genuinely troubled. "But I worked really hard for the academy acceptance and Mom and Dad just want to celebrate that. You understand, right?" I stared at her, this 17-year-old kid who'd been the center of our family's universe for so long she couldn't see past her own orbit. "I do understand," I said carefully. "I understand that you getting into a dance program matters, more than me surviving cancer." Her face crumpled and she started crying, insisting that wasn't what she meant, that she loved me, that she'd pray for me every day they were gone. I felt bad for making her cry, but also deeply tired of protecting everyone else's feelings about my situation. She left after a few more awkward minutes, and I went back to staring at the ceiling wondering how I'd become so expendable to the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. The therapy sessions I'd started with a counselor named Dr. Morrison helped me untangle some of this. Dr. Morrison specialized in cancer patients and family dynamics, and she didn't sugarcoat things. "What you're describing is emotional neglect," she told me during our 3rd session. Your parents are showing you through their actions that your sister's happiness takes precedence over your survival. And you're allowed to be angry about that. You're allowed to set boundaries and protect yourself, even from family. Thanksgiving week arrived with the weight of inevitability. My chemo session was scheduled for Tuesday, November 22nd, at 1 in the afternoon. My parents' flight to Orlando left Wednesday morning at 6. The proximity of these events felt deliberately cruel, though I knew it was just unfortunate timing. I took an Uber to the cancer center alone, my beanie pulled low and my stomach already queasy with pretreatment anxiety. The infusion center was quieter than usual, many of the regular patients probably home preparing for the holiday. Nurse Kevin got me settled in my usual chair by the window, the one that looked out over the parking lot where I could watch normal people coming and going with their normal problems. He accessed my port with his usual gentle efficiency and started the pre-meds while making small talk about his Thanksgiving plans. His family was doing a big dinner with his partner's relatives, he said, some tradition involving deep-fried turkey and way too much pie. The chemo cocktail started dripping at 1:45. ABVD is 4 different drugs administered in sequence, and I'd learned to brace for each one's specific effects. The adriamycin burn going in, a cold fire through my veins that made me grit my teeth. The bleomycin brought nausea within 30 minutes, rolling waves that the anti-nausea meds only partially controlled. I closed my eyes and tried to practice the breathing exercises Dr. Morrison had taught me, slow counts in and out, imagining the drugs as tiny warriors fighting the cancer cells. It helped a little, or maybe it just gave my brain something to focus on besides the poison being pumped into my body. Around hour 2, my phone started buzzing with texts. Mom asking if I was still planning to stay with Aunt Rachel. Dad sending a reminder to water their plants while they were gone. Like I was the house sitter instead of their daughter. Natalie sharing a packing photo. Her suitcase exploded across her bedroom floor with swimsuits and sundresses. I turned my phone face down and asked Nurse Kevin if I could watch something on the communal TV. He switched it to HGTV, some show about people buying beach houses they couldn't afford, and I let the mindless positivity wash over me. Another patient came in for treatment, an older woman named Patricia who I'd seen a few times before. She had ovarian cancer, stage 3, and the kind of dark humor that came from staring death down repeatedly. She caught my eye and nodded toward my phone, which had buzzed again. Family giving you grief, she asked. I found myself telling her the whole story, my parents and Natalie and Disney World, the words spilling out before I could stop them. Patricia listened without interrupting, her own dripping clear fluid into her arm. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she leaned forward slightly. Honey, she said, her voice firm despite her obvious exhaustion. You need to hear this. Your parents are showing you exactly who they are. Believe them. People don't suddenly become supportive when it's convenient. They either show up or they don't, and yours have chosen not to. Her bluntness was jarring but also clarifying. I'd been making excuses for them in my head, telling myself they were just busy or didn't understand how hard this was. But Patricia was right. They understood perfectly. They just decided that understanding didn't require action, that acknowledging my cancer absolved them from actually parenting me through it. The treatment finished around 5:30, and I felt the familiar post-chemo fog settling over my brain. Nurse Kevin unhooked me from the 4 and reminded me about hydration and rest, his standard speech delivered with genuine care. I scheduled my next appointment for December 6, 2 weeks out, and stumbled to the Uber pickup area. The driver tried to make conversation but gave up when I closed my eyes and leaned against the window. Back at my apartment, Vanessa had left soup and crackers on the counter with a note saying she'd check on me in the morning. I managed 3 spoonfuls of soup before the nausea one, and I spent the next hour in the bathroom dry heaving into the toilet. Wednesday morning I woke up to texts that my family had landed in Orlando. Mom sent a photo from the plane. The 3 of them squished together in their seats making excited faces. Natalie posted an Instagram story of the Orlando airport palm trees with the caption "Dreams do come true." Dad forwarded the hotel check-in confirmation like I was part of their travel group chat, which I definitely was not. I silenced my phone and tried to go back to sleep, but the chemo side effects were ramping up. My whole body ached, muscles and joints screaming like I'd been hit by a truck. The nausea was relentless despite the prescription antiemetics. I couldn't regulate my temperature, shivering under blankets 1 minute and sweating through my sheets the next. This was normal. Dr. Huang had warned me that the first few days post-treatment were always the worst, but knowing it was normal didn't make it easier to endure alone. Vanessa checked on me around noon, her face creasing with worry when she saw me curled in bed looking gray. "Do you need to go to the hospital?" she asked, already reaching for her keys. I shook my head, explaining this was just how chemo worked, that I had to ride it out. She brought me water and sat with me for a while, scrolling through her own phone, and occasionally reading out funny tweets to distract me. Her presence helped more than she probably knew. Around 3, Aunt Rachel called to check in. I told her I was staying at my apartment instead of coming to Brookdale, that I'd be fine with Vanessa nearby. Aunt Rachel had argued, but ultimately respected my decision. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her voice tight with the anger she wasn't directing at me. I gave her the sanitized version, said I was managing, that the side effects were expected. She didn't buy it for a second. "I'm coming to stay with you for a few days," she announced. "Don't argue. I'll be there in 2 hours." True to her word, Aunt Rachel showed up at 5 with an overnight bag and groceries. She was my dad's older sister, 52 years old with graying hair she refused to dye and a no-nonsense attitude. She'd honed raising 3 kids as a single mom. She'd always been the truth teller in our family, the one who called out bad behavior when everyone else stayed politely silent. She took one look at me and started organizing, setting up a medication schedule, preparing bland foods I might be able to keep down, creating a nest of pillows and blankets on the couch. "You're burning up," she said, pressing her hand to my forehead. "When's the last time you took your temperature?" I admitted I hadn't, and she produced a thermometer from her bag like a magician pulling a rabbit. 100.4, she read, frowning. "Not quite hospital level, but we're watching this closely. If it hits 100.5, we're going to the ER whether you like it or not." That night was brutal. The fever climbed to 100.3, and stayed there despite Tylenol. I couldn't keep anything down, not even water, and the dehydration made everything worse. Aunt Rachel stayed up with me, holding my hair back when I vomited, pressing cool washcloths to my neck, talking to me in low steady tones about nothing important just to keep me grounded. Around midnight my phone lit up with notifications. My family had posted photos from their first day at Magic Kingdom. Mom and Dad wearing matching Mickey ears in front of Cinderella's castle. Natalie midlaugh on some spinning teacup ride, her joy radiating through the screen. The caption on Mom's Facebook post read, "Making magical memories with my girls." And I stared at that plural possessive until the letters blurred. My girls. Like I didn't exist. Like they had only one daughter, and she was currently living her best life in Florida, while I fought to keep water down in Oregon. Aunt Rachel saw me looking at the photos and gently took my phone away. "Don't do that to yourself," she said quietly. "They're not worth your energy right now." I wanted to argue, but she was right. I was too sick to process the emotional gut punch of those images. Thursday was Thanksgiving and I spent it drifting in and out of feverish sleep on my couch while Aunt Rachel worked in the kitchen. She made turkey soup from scratch, the smell filling the apartment with a holiday warmth that felt surreal given my circumstances. Vanessa came over in the afternoon with pumpkin pie her mom had sent, and the 3 of us had a strange little Thanksgiving dinner, where I managed half a bowl of broth, and they pretended that counted as a meal. We watched the parade on TV, and I tried not to think about the fact that my parents were probably at Epcot eating around the world, while I nibbled saltines and prayed they'd stay down. More photos appeared throughout the day. My family at a character breakfast with Goofy and Pluto. Natalie wearing a princess crown in front of some castle. Dad on a roller coaster with his hands up, his face split in genuine happiness I rarely saw at home. Each image was a knife twist, proof that they were having the time of their lives without me, that my absence didn't diminish their joy one bit. Comments poured in from relatives and family friends. All variations of "looks amazing and so happy for you guys." Nobody asked where I was. Nobody seemed to notice that one daughter was missing from the magical memories. I wondered if my parents had told people I was sick, or if they'd just let everyone assume I was busy with school, too old for family vacations, voluntarily absent instead of deliberately excluded. Friday my fever finally broke, dropping to 99 and then to normal by evening. The nausea started to ease into a manageable queasiness instead of constant upheaval. Aunt Rachel made me chicken broth and toast, celebrating when I kept it down for a full hour. "You're turning a corner," she said, relief evident in her voice. I'd been scared, she admitted. Chemo is no joke, and doing it without proper support is dangerous. She didn't say what we were both thinking, that my parents should have been there, that I shouldn't have needed my aunt to drop everything and play nurse because my actual parents were too busy playing tourist. The unspoken accusation hung in the air between us, heavy and undeniable. That evening Aunt Rachel sat me down at the kitchen table with tea I wasn't drinking, and a look that meant we were having a serious conversation whether I wanted to or not. "Brennan," she started, choosing her words carefully, "I need you to understand something. What your parents are doing isn't just thoughtless or bad timing. It's a pattern, and it's been going on your whole life." I wanted to defend them out of habit, but she held up a hand. "I've watched Victor and Diane pour everything into Natalie while treating you like an afterthought since you were kids. Every recital, every competition, every achievement of hers got celebrated like a national holiday. Your accomplishments got a pat on the head if you were lucky. I've bit my tongue for years because they're family and it wasn't my place, but this crosses a line. You have cancer. You're 22 years old going through chemotherapy alone, and they're at Disney World. That's not a mistake or poor judgment. That's a choice, and it tells you everything you need to know about how they value you." Her words cracked something open in my chest. I'd known all of this on some level, felt it in the thousand small ways they'd prioritized Natalie over me. But hearing someone else name it made it real in a way I couldn't deny. The tears came then, hot and angry and tinged with grief for the parents I'd wanted them to be versus who they actually were. Aunt Rachel moved around the table to hug me, and I sobbed into her shoulder like a kid, mourning not just their absence during my cancer, but the lifetime of absence that had preceded it. She let me cry it out, rubbing my back and murmuring that I deserved so much better. When I finally pulled away, eyes swollen and nose running, she handed me tissues and said something that shifted my entire perspective. "You get to decide what happens next. You get to choose whether you keep letting them hurt you, or whether you build boundaries that protect you. Either way, I've got your back." Saturday brought a new wave of Disney photos. The family at Hollywood Studios, posing with stormtroopers. Natalie eating a massive ice cream sundae, chocolate smeared on her grinning face. Mom and Dad looking relaxed and happy in a way I never saw when they were dealing with dealership stress or, apparently, their daughter's cancer. Sunday they flew home, and I steeled myself for their return. Aunt Rachel had gone back to Brookdale Saturday night after making sure I was stable, leaving behind containers of soup and a promise to call every day. I spent Sunday cleaning my apartment and trying to prepare mentally for seeing my family. Part of me wanted to scream at them, to lay out exactly how much their choice had hurt. Another part wanted to pretend everything was fine, to avoid conflict and go back to the comfortable numbness of being overlooked. Dr. Morrison's voice echoed in my head from our last session. "You teach people how to treat you. If you accept this behavior, you're giving them permission to continue it." They didn't come by Sunday night or Monday. Tuesday I had to go to their house to return the keys they'd given me for plant watering. A task I'd completed despite being in the throes of chemo hell, because apparently I was more reliable sick than they were healthy. I drove over after work. Vanessa had helped me get back to very light shifts at the coffee shop now that I was feeling better, and let myself in. The house smelled stale from being closed up, and suitcases were still scattered in the entryway waiting to be unpacked. I found my parents in the kitchen sorting through mail, both of them tan and rested. "Oh honey," Mom said when she saw me, her tone cheerful. "We were just about to call you. How are you feeling?" The casual question, like she was asking about a head cold instead of cancer treatment, made my jaw clench. "I'm fine," I said flatly, setting the keys on the counter. "Glad you had a good trip." Mom launched into a detailed recap of everything they'd done, the restaurants, the rides, the shows. Dad chimed in about the hotel amenities and how the weather had been perfect. Neither of them asked about my chemo session or how I'd managed alone. They didn't mention that they'd missed Thanksgiving with me or acknowledge that leaving might have been hurtful. It was like the trip existed in a separate reality from my cancer, two parallel tracks that never intersected in their minds. Natalie bounced in from the living room, her face lighting up when she saw me. "Brennan," she squealed, hugging me tight. "I brought you something." She ran upstairs and returned with a small Disney gift bag, presenting it like a prize. Inside was a Mickey Mouse stuffed animal, one of the classic ones with the red shorts and yellow shoes. I stared at it, this $20 toy they'd bought to assuage whatever minor guilt they felt about leaving me behind. Natalie watched expectantly, waiting for me to be touched by the gesture. "I thought of you when I saw it," she said earnestly. "I know Mickey's not really your thing, but I wanted you to have something from the trip." The kindness in her voice was genuine, which somehow made it worse. She really didn't understand that a stuffed mouse didn't compensate for abandonment, that you couldn't souvenir shop your way out of fundamental betrayal. I managed a tight smile and thanked her, tucking the mouse back in the bag. My parents had already moved on to discussing dinner plans, debating between leftovers and ordering pizza, the conversation flowing around me like I was a piece of furniture. I left after 10 minutes, claiming I had homework to finish. Nobody tried to stop me or suggest we spend time together catching up. Back in my car, I sat gripping the steering wheel and staring at that stupid Mickey Mouse in the passenger seat. This was my life. My parents would always choose Natalie, would always find ways to justify why her needs mattered more than mine, and I could either accept that reality or change my relationship with them. The decision crystallized in that moment with startling clarity. I was done accepting crumbs and calling it love. I was done pretending their neglect was accidental or well-meaning. If they wanted a relationship with me going forward, it would be on my terms, with boundaries that protected me from their casual cruelty. I started the car and drove home, leaving the Mickey Mouse on their front porch. I didn't need souvenirs from a trip that had taught me everything I needed to know about my place in their priorities. December brought a bitter cold that settled into Riverside like it planned to stay. My next chemo session happened on schedule December 6th, and this time I asked Marcus to drive me. Marcus Chen had been my best friend since freshman orientation, a computer science major with a dry sense of humor and unwavering loyalty. He'd been checking in throughout my treatment, sending memes and offering help I usually refused because asking felt too vulnerable. But after the Disney disaster, I realized that accepting support from people who actually cared wasn't weakness. Marcus showed up at my apartment in his beat-up Honda, carrying coffee from Grounds & Co. that he knew I couldn't drink but brought anyway as a gesture. The drive to Riverside General was quiet, comfortable, him not pushing me to talk but present in a way that mattered. He stayed through the entire 4-hour infusion, working on his laptop in the chair beside mine, occasionally reading out ridiculous Reddit threads to make me laugh. When the nausea hit hard around hour 3, he held the basin without flinching and cracked jokes about how chemo was just an extreme cleanse that wellness influencers would probably charge thousands for. Nurse Kevin loved him immediately, the two of them bonding over video games while adjusting my 4 rate. Having Marcus there transformed the experience from something I endured alone into something slightly more bearable, proof that chosen family could show up harder than blood relatives. On the drive home, he stopped at the pharmacy to fill my prescriptions, waiting in line while I dozed in the passenger seat, then helped me up the stairs to my apartment because the fatigue had turned my legs to concrete. Vanessa was there when we arrived, having prepared the couch nest and queued up comfort shows on Netflix. Between her and Marcus, I had everything I needed for the post-chemo crash: anti-nausea meds on schedule, bland foods within reach, people who gave a damn whether I lived or died. My phone buzzed periodically with texts from my parents, surface-level check-ins asking how treatment went in the same tone they'd used to ask about a dentist appointment. I stopped responding after the first couple, too tired to maintain the pretense that their minimal effort was acceptable. Natalie sent longer messages, paragraphs about her dance rehearsals and excitement about the academy starting in January, always ending with "hope you're feeling okay" as an afterthought. I realized she'd been trained by our parents to center herself in every conversation, that even her expressions of care somehow looped back to her own experiences and feelings. The week before Christmas, I met with Dr. Huang for a progress check. My scans showed the tumors were responding well to treatment, shrinking at the expected rate. "We're on track," she said, her smile genuine behind her glasses. "You're tolerating the chemo better than many patients." I should have felt relieved, victorious even, But mostly I felt exhausted by the idea of 4 more months of this. Dr. Huang noticed my lack of enthusiasm and asked about my support system. I found myself telling her about Disney World. The words coming out flat and emotionless because I'd replayed the story so many times in therapy it had lost its sharp edges. She listened without the performative shock I'd gotten from some people, just nodded and made a note in my chart. Social support is critical for treatment outcomes, she said carefully. If your family isn't providing that, it's important you build it elsewhere. You're doing that with your friends, which is good. But you also need to address the family situation before it impacts your mental health more than it already has. Christmas was approaching and I dreaded it with an intensity that surprised me. Usually I loved the holidays, the lights and music, and excuse to bake cookies I'd perfected over years of trial and error. But this year everything felt hollow, tainted by the knowledge that my family would gather and pretend everything was fine while I sat there bald and sick, the living reminder of their failure to show up. Mom called mid-December to discuss Christmas plans, her voice bright with forced cheer. We're thinking Christmas Eve at our place, she said. Just family, nice and low-key. Natalie's friend Tyler might join us, and Aunt Rachel said she'd come. We'll do presents in the morning like always. The casualness of it, like the past few months hadn't happened, like we were still a functional family unit, made my stomach turn. I told her I'd think about it and let her know, which was code for I'm absolutely not coming, but don't have the energy to fight about it yet. I talked it through with Dr. Morrison during our next session, laying out the dilemma. Part of me wanted to go and confront them, to force some kind of reckoning where they acknowledged what they'd done. Another part wanted to skip it entirely, to protect myself from more disappointment. Dr. Morrison leaned back in her chair, considering. What would going accomplish, she asked. If you're hoping for an apology or changed behavior, is that realistic based on everything you've told me? I admitted it wasn't. Then you have your answer, she said gently. You're allowed to opt out of situations that harm you, even if they're family traditions. Especially then, actually. I called Mom 2 days before Christmas Eve and told her I wouldn't be coming. There was a long pause, then her voice went tight. Why not, she asked, and I could hear the offense creeping in. I kept my tone neutral. I don't feel up to it, which was partially true. I'm still recovering from my last treatment, and large gatherings wipe me out. It was a diplomatic excuse that gave her an out, a way to accept my absence without admitting any wrongdoing. But Mom wasn't interested in outs. Brennan, we're your family, she said, her voice rising slightly. It's Christmas. Natalie will be so disappointed. The fact that she led with Natalie's disappointment instead of wanting to see me confirmed everything I needed to know. I'm sorry, I said, not sorry at all. I need to take care of myself right now. I'll see you all after the holidays. She tried to guilt me for another few minutes, talking about tradition and family time, and how they'd already bought my presents. Dad got on the line at some point, his approach more irritated than manipulative. Your mother went to a lot of trouble planning this dinner, he said. The least you can do is show up for a few hours. The transactional nature of his statement, that I owed them my presents because of their effort, was so of how they viewed relationships. Everything was currency and debt, never just love for its own sake. I ended the call by saying my decision was final, and wishing them a nice holiday, then blocked their numbers for the week, because I knew they'd keep pushing. Aunt Rachel called 10 minutes later, having clearly been briefed. I hear you're skipping Christmas, she said, no judgment in her tone. Good for you. I'm skipping too, actually. Want to have our own dinner at my place in Brookdale. Christmas with Aunt Rachel ended up being exactly what I needed. She made ham and scalloped potatoes, foods I could actually eat without my chemo-altered taste buds revolting. Her house was small but warm, decorated with mismatched ornaments her kids had made over the years, and a real tree that dropped needles every time someone walked past. We watched bad Christmas movies and exchanged modest gifts. She gave me a soft blanket and a journal. I gave her a coffee table book about Oregon lighthouses she'd been eyeing. There was no performance or obligation, just two people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company choosing to spend the holiday together. She told me stories about my dad as a kid, how even then he'd been competitive and image-focused, always needing to have the best of everything. I think that's why Natalie's achievements matter so much to him, she mused. He can brag about her at the dealership, Show her off. Your nursing dreams are noble but not flashy, so they don't serve his ego the same way. Her analysis stung because it rang true. I'd never been the kind of kid who generated bragging rights. I was steady and reliable, good grades but not valedictorian, nice enough but not prom queen material. Natalie was the star, and stars attracted attention my parents craved. After Christmas, I unblocked my family's numbers to find a dozen texts. Moms were passive-aggressive, hoping I'd had a nice day and that we were still family despite my absence. Dads were brief and annoyed, one line about missing the celebration. Natalie's were the hardest to read, long paragraphs about how weird Christmas was without me. How Tyler had asked where I was and she'd had to explain I was sick. She included photos of the gift they'd gotten me. A nice winter coat. I probably would have appreciated if the gesture wasn't tainted by everything else. I didn't respond to any of them, just archived the texts and moved on with my day. January brought my 7th chemo session and Natalie's departure for the dance academy. The timing meant my parents threw her a big going-away party the weekend before she left, a catered affair at the house with relatives and her dance friends. I wasn't explicitly uninvited, but the lack of genuine invitation spoke volumes. Aunt Rachel attended and reported back that it was exactly as obnoxious as I'd imagined. Victor giving a speech about how proud he was, Diane crying while showing a photo slideshow of Natalie's dance career. Nobody mentioned me except one cousin who asked where I was, and apparently Mom had waved it off saying I was busy with school. The erasure was complete. I existed in their lives only as an absence they occasionally had to explain away, never as a person whose presence they actually missed. My treatment continued through winter, each session blending into the next in a haze of nausea and fatigue. Marcus and Vanessa rotated driving duties. Sometimes Aunt Rachel would make the drive from Brookdale to sit with me. I joined a young adult cancer support group at Dr. Huang's suggestion, and Wednesday evenings became sacrosanct time where I sat in a circle with 5 other people who understood the unique hell of being seriously ill while your peers were out living normal 20s lives. There was Jordan, 24 with leukemia, who joked that chemo was cheaper than the party drugs he'd been doing pre-diagnosis. Casey, 19 with brain cancer, who'd had to defer college and move home with parents who treated her like she was dying even though her prognosis was good. Marcus, different Marcus, 28 with testicular cancer, who'd gotten dumped by his fiancée 2 weeks into treatment because she couldn't handle it. We shared the worst parts of our experiences without judgment. The fear and anger and dark humor that people outside this world found uncomfortable. I told them about Disney World during my 3rd session, and the response was immediate validation. "That's fucked up," Jordan said bluntly, and everyone nodded. Casey shared that her dad had missed her surgery because he had a golf tournament he didn't want to skip. Marcus had a brother who kept sending him alternative medicine articles, instead of just accepting that he was doing actual chemo. We were a club nobody wanted to join, but once you were in, the solidarity was fierce. These strangers understood me better than my own family, saw me more clearly than people who'd known me my whole life. It was a gift and a tragedy in equal measure. February marked my 9th treatment, 2/3 done with the protocol. My hair had started growing back in soft patches, though Dr. Huang warned it might fall out again before we finished. The nausea was more manageable now that I'd figured out which foods and medications worked for my body. I'd even picked up more hours at Grounds & Co., working short shifts that got me out of the apartment and feeling somewhat normal. Christine had been incredibly accommodating, letting me set my own schedule and never making me feel guilty when I needed to call out. My co-workers knew about the cancer. I'd been open about it because hiding seemed exhausting, and they'd rallied in small ways. Someone always had my favorite tea ready when I arrived. They'd pooled money to send flowers after my 5th treatment. It was the kind of support that should have come from family, but I'd learned to accept it wherever it appeared. My parents reached out sporadically, texts and occasional calls that felt obligatory rather than genuine. They never asked the hard questions. What were my bad days like? Was I scared? Did I need anything emotionally or financially? The conversations stayed surface level, weather and dealership gossip and updates about Natalie's academy progress. She was thriving apparently, learning from renowned choreographers and making connections in the dance world. Mom sent videos of her performances, beautiful fluid movements that I could appreciate objectively while feeling nothing personally. We'd become strangers, Natalie and I. Whatever sibling bond we'd had eroded by years of unequal treatment, that the Disney trip had simply made impossible to ignore. I didn't hate her exactly, but I didn't have the energy to maintain a relationship she'd never truly valued beyond its convenience to her. March brought spring rain and my 10th treatment. I was in the home stretch now, just 2 more sessions after this one. Dr. Huang was pleased with my progress. The tumor's nearly gone, my blood counts recovering well between treatments. We started talking about post-treatment surveillance, the scans and checkups I'd need for years to monitor for recurrence. The 5-year survival rate for my stage was over 90%, she reminded me, but we'd stay vigilant. I should have felt relieved to be nearing the end. And part of me did, but another part felt unmoored. Cancer had become my identity for 6 months, the thing that structured my days and explained my limitations. Who would I be when treatment ended and I had to rebuild a normal life, whatever that meant now? Dr. Morrison helped me process the anticipatory grief of finishing treatment, the unexpected loss that came with leaving behind this sick identity. You've been through trauma, she said during one session. Not just the cancer itself but everything around it, your family's abandonment, the physical toll, the forced confrontation with mortality at 22. You don't just bounce back from that. Give yourself permission to grieve what you've lost, including the family you thought you had. Her words gave me permission to feel the full weight of everything, not just the cancer but the loneliness, the betrayal, the fundamental shift in how I saw myself and my relationships. I started journaling more, filling pages with angry rants and sad revelations, and occasional hopeful notes about the future I was building despite everything. My birthday was coming up in mid-April, right between my 11th and 12th treatments. 23 felt impossibly old, and impossibly young simultaneously. I'd survived a year that should have killed me, at least statistically speaking for some patients, but I'd lost so much in the process. Vanessa asked what I wanted to do to celebrate, and I realized I didn't want a party or presents or any traditional celebration. I just wanted acknowledgement, to be seen by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. It felt like the smallest ask and somehow the most impossible. My parents had sent a card for my 22nd birthday, the one I'd spent in chemo while they were at Disney, a generic Hallmark thing that arrived a week late. I wondered if they'd even remember this year, or if I'd slipped so far off their radar that birthdays no longer registered. The day before my birthday, I had treatment number 11. Marcus drove me and stayed through the whole session, working on a coding project while I dozed in the infusion chair. Nurse Kevin brought me apple juice and saltines, the snack I'd grown to tolerate, and told me how proud he was of how far I'd come. "You're one of the fighters," he said, adjusting my blankets. "Some people come in here already defeated, but you've shown up ready to battle every single time." His words lodged somewhere in my chest, warm and affirming. I had fought, even when I'd wanted to give up, even when my own family made it clear my fight wasn't their priority. I'd shown up for myself when nobody else would. And that counted for something even if it shouldn't have had to be that way. My birthday dawned rainy and cold, typical Oregon spring weather. I woke up to texts from Marcus, Vanessa, and Aunt Rachel, all wishing me a happy day and promising to celebrate that weekend when I felt better. My support group friends had sent messages the night before, inside jokes and cancer humor that made me smile. Christine texted that my shift was covered, and to take the day for myself. The outpouring from my chosen family was overwhelming in the best way. Proof that I'd built something real even as my birth family had crumbled. Around noon, my phone rang with my mom's contact. I debated letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity won. "Happy birthday, honey," she said when I answered, her voice cheerful. 23, can you believe it? "We wanted to take you to dinner this weekend if you're feeling up to it." The offer felt transactional. A checkbox they were ticking to maintain the illusion of functional family. "I'm busy this weekend," I lied, not ready to sit through a strained dinner where they asked surface questions and patted themselves on the back for showing up. "Maybe another time." There was a pause, then Mom's voice cooled slightly. "Well, we'll send your present by mail then. I hope you have a nice day. Dad wants to say hi." She passed the phone and my father's voice came through, distant and formal. "Happy birthday, Brennan. Hope you're feeling better. Let us know if you need anything." The brevity was almost comical, 30 seconds of parental obligation discharged. They didn't ask about my treatment, or how I'd spent the day, or what turning 23 meant to me after the year I'd had. The call ended and I sat staring at my phone, feeling hollow. Natalie called an hour later, her voice bright with performative enthusiasm. "Happy birthday," she sang. "I can't believe you're 23 already. Sorry I can't be there. The academy schedule is insane." She launched into a detailed description of her current choreography project, some contemporary piece about transformation. I listened with half attention, making appropriate noises while thinking about how even my birthday had become about her achievements. She wrapped up by saying she'd sent me a present, some skincare set she'd been raving about that I probably wouldn't use because chemo had wrecked my skin beyond what fancy lotions could fix. "Love you," she said before hanging up, the words automatic and empty. I wondered if she'd ever actually loved me, or if I'd just been a supporting character in her story. Useful when she needed an audience, but ultimately forgettable. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.